So today we're just looking at really two of the more advanced functions that you can use in Survey123 Connect. We're going to use Connect to kind of show this stuff off now. That's not to say they can't be used in the web, but you have to kind of build these in Survey123 Connect. So we're looking at the Pulldata function, and that kind of is nested with some built-in functionality, and JavaScript functions. So very, very powerful stuff to really kind of supercharge your survey forms and either automate data entry, add supplemental data from other sources, or we'll just do something simple like converting a text input or an answer to uppercase, something that we probably have all used one way or another in Excel, but you have to use JavaScript to kind of get that on the front end in Survey123 form. So the Pulldata function, just in general, why would I use this? Why do I need it? It kind of allows you to do some enhanced calculations for questions, and we'll show just two examples, but there are so many different ways to use these. But when we left the end of part one, I showed a Pulldata function using a CSV file that was embedded and published as part of your survey, where you can go in and put in a tree common name, and it would return the genus and species, kind of querying that table to find related data and bring it back into the survey without the user really doing anything other than putting in the piece you're using to query the data. So, to advance, to elaborate on that, we'll show some more uses for this. But yeah, calculation of questions, and really the big thing is loading data from other files or sources. So what we're going to look at today is like the maybe querying an API or a feature layer and returning either the entire JSON array of something, or even how to parse through that JSON array and find maybe the one or two or a handful of attributes or pieces in that JSON that you actually need for the survey. And then so when we look at this, the Pulldata function, there are a couple different ways to use this with the CSV or an API or JSON call, or one of the newer ones and the more exciting ones, the Pulldata functions, is this @layer functionality. So I wanted to cover this here so you can kind of see what's going on, the parameters that are needed, and then we're going to jump into Connect and kind of show this off. But really, this @layer one allows you to query a feature layer for certain data. There's a bunch of different ways that you can get granular with this @layer Pulldata request, but in general, it takes a JSON property. It can take a location. So if you have like a geopoint question, you can use that as a reference to do a geometry search or selection on your feature layer and return something. And the URL that you needed is like your feature layer, your REST endpoint that you're going to query. And then you can do a where clause where you get more specific and kind of pre-filter what you're looking through on the feature layer. So I just wanted to show this real quick, because when we look at the calculation and Connect, it's just going to all be, I've put it together already, but we'll kind of show what it looks like in there. But I just wanted to show a quick reference of what the parameters are that we're going to be using. So all right, so we're going to do the Pulldata demo, and then we'll come back and look at the JavaScript stuff overview, and then we'll go back to another part 2 demo. So I'm going to bring this up. And so here we are in Connect. If you're not familiar, please go back to part 1. We kind of covered this in general, but I do want to point out before I jump into my custom survey form that I'm using, there are templates that you can use and samples that you can use to see how this stuff works in a very general sense. And honestly, with the samples they give you, those are live. You can see how to query an API, do some other things. So Just know that aside from what I'm going to show today, if you want to get into it, you can search, I think JavaScript, yep, and you'll see that there is a sample form that you can click and download and start with that has all of this built into it. Same with Pulldata. If you type in Pulldata, you'll see calculate from a CSV, calculate from a geopoint, query a feature layer. So these are all, there's plenty of other ways to kind of learn how this all works aside from the few demos I'm going to do today. So just know those are there. And if you do those, if you open those samples, you'll get something like this. This is the query a feature layer sample that is provided. So you can see there's 5 different pages that it's trying to currently load. And it's going to basically have pre-built functionality that you can look at the background of and see what's going on. So of course, this only happens during a webinar. Wonderful. All right, please hold. Oh, there we go. All right, so that's a sample you can use to look through. And then there's also the JavaScript one that you can look at. But all right, so the Pulldata demo, the 2 things I'm going to cover today, we've got how to query a feature layer and get either an entire JSON array of an attribute or a feature, and then how to get a specific attribute from that feature. And then we're going to look at another cool one that I've used in a few survey forms where you do an address search or have a geocode question, and whatever gets put in there, as long as it's a true result, it will automatically move and center your geopoint question to where that is. So, so we'll open this up, and I'm going to just show the functionality as the the user interface, and then we'll look at the background of how this is all working. So I have a tree inventory layer in ArcGIS Online that you can see here. So I've got this feature, this hosted feature layer, and it's got some data in it here. I've used this in some other webinars, but right now we've got 4 assets, 4 trees that have asset names of tree 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they've got some associated data with them. And what we're going to show is how you could put something in a query parameter. So in this case, we're going to query on asset name, and it's going to return an entire JSON array of the entire feature that we're looking for. And then we're going to look at how do I get one specific piece, one specific attribute of the feature that I'm looking for. So if we go back in here, it's asking for an asset name. So we just saw that's tree-1, 2, 3, or 4. So if I type in tree-1 and I hit enter, there's some things going on here, right? So now we've used some relevancies to set, hey, once there's an input, show me some data. So in general, there's a query SQL that's going on, and I showed that in the slide where we're querying the feature layer and we're providing a dynamic, in this case, a dynamic query using, we know what the field name is, and we're getting the input from the user and creating that SQL statement that we're using. So this is an example of what it's calculating in the background after I put in an asset name. And then the JavaScript or the Pulldata request is going out and getting a JavaScript or JSON response from just a normal query on a feature layer, and it's bringing back the attributes of the row that's tree-1. The asset name is tree-1. So you can see here, it's not very pretty, but it's got, my object ID is 1, global ID is this, asset ID is 1, asset name is tree.1. That's what we're expecting to be because of the query we had and some other things. So if you go down here, it's like, yeah, that's great, but most times we don't really need that return to our survey as something to use or see at the user interface level. So typically this would be something that's calculated in the background. The user doesn't really know that's the return value, but we do something with what's in there. And so this next one is a new added functionality with the Pulldata request using this @layer, where you can ahead of time say, I don't need the full JSON response. I just need this one attribute, the one value of this attribute for whatever I'm querying. So it can get ahead of kind of querying out what you need from this JSON response. You could also do this in a different way where you use a different piece of the pull data and you parse this JSON response. So for something like an API, and you can see this in the samples that are embedded in Survey123 Connect, you could query a third-party API. I think in the one they have, it's looking at DMV records or license plate lookup or something. So that would allow you to get the JSON response, and then you can parse through this JSON manually if you would like. So there's a couple different ways to get things out of the JSON response, but when you're working with feature layers, Esri has provided a secondary, like pre-canned, you just want this one piece from the JSON response of the feature layer query. So two things, one is just, this is just basically a different way of getting what we want out of this request, but I wanted to show, kind of the way you can dynamically query, what you expect to see at the large scale, the full JSON response, and then how you can parse through that and get one thing out of it. So now let's go into the form, the XLS form in the background, and let's look at this. So if I get rid of this, make this a little bit bigger. So here's my group that I was just looking at, where we're querying a feature layer. And there's a text question that I'm asking for, the asset name. Now you could get very specific and make sure they're putting in what you need to use to query the specific attribute you're looking at. But in this case, for the demo, it's just a very basic text question. And then this is, it's set to text so you can see it on the front end, but normally this would also be a calculate in the background where it's taking my input and concatenating the query string around it. So it's concatenating asset name equals, and then single quotes, and in between those single quotes are the value that I need to the text value of the tree or the asset name. So you can do that within the pull data request, but it's always nice to kind of put that in a separate calculate question so you can debug and test and kind of figure out what that needs to be and how that's going to work with the input type. And then the big things here are, this is called, the get record. So we're looking at the pull data. We're using let's see if I can zoom in on this. We're looking at the at layer. And so again, this is the type of pull data request we're doing. And then because of the at layer request, we have another parameter that we can put in that's kind of a subtype of the type of pull data request. So right now we're using the get record request. So we're getting the entire record or the entire feature, the attributes of the feature in a JSON response. And like I showed in the slide, we input the URL of our feature layer, the REST service. And then the next piece is the SQL statement or the query statement that we're using. And here, instead of hand typing, having this calculated in the same pull data request, I'm pushing this as a question response, a calculated question to my pull data request. So it's calculated here, and then that's appended into this pull data request. And this is giving me my full JSON response of the attributes and the geometry. So something else you could use aside from the raw attributes. And so when we go back in here, the next one is, again, a pull data request using the at layer function. And this one, instead of get record, where we're getting the entire JSON of the attributes, we're saying get value. That is another subset or a sub item you can use where you tell it, I just want this one attribute. And in this case, my get value or the attribute I want is attributes.scientific. So we're parsing the JSON on the fly, going into the, it's getting this and saying attributes. All right, so now we're in this section, and then we're saying dot scientific. So it's looking for scientific and returning the value of that key scientific. So prunus persica is exactly what we would expect to see as a value. So depending on how you want to use this feature layer query, you have two kind of big options. There's plenty of other ones that are linked in the references at the end of this, but these two are probably the most commonly used, at least for me, and it's something I think it's kind of an easy way to kind of get started looking at the feature layer. So all right, so the next one, this is kind of a cool one that I did for somebody, and I've used it a few times, and it's kind of a cool way to use a couple of the functions of geocoding and input, and then making your map automatically zoom to it. So if I put in an address, and we'll use Cloud Points building here, I'm going to get some responses that match, kind of geocoding, matching, and I'm going to click this one, and you can see then some things fill out based on what's being returned from this geocode response. So I typed in 1407, I clicked one, and it's saying, all right, well, when we geocoded that, this was the address that we found that's associated with that. Here again is the address. When I clicked that address, it also brought back the latitude and longitude. You can then pass that into your geopoint question and either make it read-only or kind of jumpstart it and put it wherever they're saying, wherever the geocode entry was. So you can see this one's read-only, but it's right here on our building. And now if I ever needed a map entry or a point created using an address, I've already pre-filtered that on the front end. And there's also a way to search within the map, the geopoint, but it's kind of nice to maybe bring this into the front end, the user interface, and not only center the map, but you could bring back certain things that you get out of that geocode response. The geocode response looks a lot like this. It's a JSON array. There's obviously different things in there, but you kind of can do the same thing where you bring back, I just need the latitude and longitude, and I want to pass that to my geopoint question. So if I go into the background now, on this one, you can see that I'm getting the address search, and the appearance for this is geocode. That's built in. You all have access to that if you want to geocode an address search. And then that returns by default a JSON array. So then we're using a different type of pull data request where we're looking at parsing the JSON, and I'm searching the JSON that was returned in my address search geocode, and I'm looking for the address piece. So now I've got that address piece of the JSON in this text question, and then I can go in and actually pull data from that and get the location.y and the location.x, which are included in that response, and use that as an input to my geopoint question. So a lot going on, but a really cool way to use pull data requests to kind of get what you need to, kind of 2 or 3 different ways. So, all right. We got to stop there because I'm already over the time I had allotted for those. But obviously very, very complex, but very useful things depending on kind of how much extra work you want to put into a survey form. But can be really helpful and save a lot of time on the back end when you're looking at data or you need to do some QA, QC. So, all right, we're going to jump back in here. And so we did the Pulldata demo, and now the big thing, one of my most favorite things in Survey123 is the JavaScript functionality. There's a lot of good, the sample has a lot of good demos on how to do this. There's plenty of documentation on JavaScript itself, and Survey123's JavaScript interpreter reads, I haven't found anything it doesn't read, as far as the different forms of JavaScript that are out there. But you can use these to kind of pass data back from a question or something else into a calculation, a constraint, or relevancy expression. It also provides access to APIs, third-party APIs, I should say. They've made it clear that this pull data at layer function should be used in lieu of what you can do where you use JavaScript as a function to go do your REST query or your layer query. So keep that in mind, that's kind of one big thing. If you're doing a API, the REST API request to get data, you should be using the pull data request, not a custom JavaScript function. And another big thing that is really cool is that you have to use Connect to build these JavaScript functions. But when you publish the form, when you use it in the web form, these JavaScript functions will fire and will work. So really awesome. It's kind of saved me in a couple of the forms I've built for clients that need to be web-based, but need some functionality that you can't get by just starting in the web designer. So, all right. Now we'll go to our demo. We're going to show a couple basic things that are surprising you can't do, and then some other very more complex things. So I'll get rid of these. So now, something that came up a couple years ago was like, hey, I need to convert this to uppercase after somebody puts it in. Well, in Excel, you're like, okay, well, we just run the upper, to upper function. Well, that doesn't exist for XLS forms here. So this was honestly the first JavaScript function I ever did was, okay, somebody typed something in a question, and the value we actually wanted to submit to the feature layer, we wanted to be in uppercase. So as easy as something like, let's just say the typical hello world. And when I type enter, the JavaScript function runs, converts that text to uppercase and puts it in another question. So in the case of this, you would probably have this in the background. The user doesn't know it's being converted, but that's what's getting submitted to the feature layer or wherever, the table or whatever. Another one that seems simple enough, but takes JavaScript to do in Survey123 is splitting text. So some other things I've done where like, hey, we have this response, this question is being answered by default or coming from somewhere else if you're getting it from a Pulldata request. I only need the first piece that's split on a colon or a semicolon or a comma. How do I get that to work in here? Well, you would run a JavaScript function and say, all right, the parameter is, what do you want to split? So I'll say, hello world, that's how it's coming back. And then the JavaScript function is going to take another parameter of what character do you want to split on. In this case, if this was my answer, I want to split on a comma. And then when I hit tab, there's another question that's running that JavaScript function, taking the input of my text and splitting it on the character that I've assigned it. You can do that in the survey. Obviously the user probably not be selecting what you split on, but just to kind of show how it works, this is on the front end. And then it's returning some dynamic text I've wrote in to just kind of show how it works, where it takes it, splits it into an array, and you can see now that item 0 in my array is hello, item 1 is world, because it's split on that comma. And so if I add to this and say Survey123 really rocks, oops, you'll see that that's going to grow and say now we have 3 items starting at 0, 1, and 2. Survey123 really rocks. So there's those 2 basic things. And then another one that I've used a lot is, how do we calculate date difference of something? So the user puts something in, I need to know based on some other input, how many days since whatever, right? So this one we're going to look at, what's your birthday, how many days have gone by, and then we would use the answer, the number of days or years or months or whatever to do something in the form. Maybe that's just calculating something or making them answer something or saying as a constraint like, whoa, that's been way too long, you can't put that data in, that can't be right. So in this one, if I put, hey, what was your date of birth? I don't know, maybe I was born on the 1st. Well, it's going to convert my date to a string in the background, and it's going to run the function. And this is actually the function, and it's saying, hey, it's been 25 days. And then just to kind of show how you can use that value as something, we're calculating a response based on how many days it's been. And it's saying, hey, you're only 25 days old. You're a baby genius. But if you put in something like, if you go back to, I don't know, 2000, we can put that date in, and now we're getting a different response based on the number of days. It's saying, hey, stay young as long as you can. But that's how you can use it. Now let's look at kind of how it all works in the background. So again, we're doing a Pulldata request. This is another type of Pulldata request, but it's specifically running JavaScript. So we're using the Pulldata, where the type of Pulldata is at JavaScript. And then I go and it's saying, hey, what's the name of your JavaScript function? And then what's the name of the file, and what's the name of the function, and what are you passing into it, right? So if I go back to Connect, at the very bottom here, most of us are familiar with the form piece, right? All the way over to the right, the second one from the end, you're going to see scripts. Here is where you add your scripts. They live actually in the media folder. So if I open this, you'll see over here, if I can get this. So now in my folder for this, I have a scripts folder, and you can design these outside of this editor here, and I would encourage you to save them somewhere else and then copy and paste them into the scripts folder. And now you'll see them as available scripts, and you can run your function. So in this one, the date difference, its input is a date string, and then we're doing a conversion, and it's returning the number of days, right? So we're using JavaScript. We've got, we're creating a new date item. We're parsing the dates as the string to a true date. Then we're using a round and date subtraction and returning the result. In the split string, same thing. We've named our function. We have two parameters, the value and the separator that you saw. And then we're just splitting on a separator, which is the comma in the example. And then we're returning a dynamic for loop to return however many items were in there, name the item number, and then return the concatenated piece of text, right? And then to uppercase, this is the easiest one of all. We're taking an input of a text value, and we're saying, all right, trim, any white space, right? If you had white, empty space at the beginning or end, and then use the JavaScript function to uppercase. Very simple. These obviously can get very, very complex. We can do a lot of really cool stuff, but these are the basics. And once you put those in, have them available, you can start to call them in your calculation questions using the pull data at JavaScript and put your parameters in here. So there's plenty of documentation on all of this, and I've got examples. We're going to provide this at the end, and I can provide this XLSX form as a demo for you guys if you want to kind of see how it all looks. But I'm already out of time. These always go way too fast. So if I go back to kind of the summary here, sorry I had to go so fast, but I will send out as much as I can to allow you guys to have something to reference. But again, helpful resources, Pulldata Functions on the website, and these will be linked. And then there's a blog and some other items here. So if there were questions, I'm sorry I failed to leave time to answer.